Welcome back to Proxy Hammer, everybody, and today we're going to be looking at a Warhammer 40k Spring Escalation League that I'm going to be participating in over the next couple of months up until the release of 10th edition. So this league was originally going to be in the summer because we had assumed that the new edition would probably be coming in the fall, but we weren't sure, and now with this confirmation that, the edition is indeed going to be in the summer, we don't have a lot of time to do this league before the new edition changes, so we decided we're just going to go ahead and start it with what we had. So a lot of players in the group actually don't have all of the models necessary to participate in the league. However, a vast majority of them, I think like 8 or so players at least have 500 points built and painted. I currently don't. I think I need a couple more units to get to 500 points and then a couple more units past that to get to 750. So I only have a little bit of time before I have to do that, but hopefully I can get that done. And reason being is because this league, unlike our other games where we can just proxy and kind of have unpainted models and stuff, which we usually do, try things out and stuff like that, in this league we do have to have fully painted and base models as if it were a tournament where you had to score on your painting. So we are going to be counting that. Usually what we do in our games, to be honest with you guys, is we just count the 10 points anyway as if we had everything painted, but we don't. And I think most of you guys know that about me by now, is that, I really do like to proxy and try new things and, have games where, maybe not everything's painted or not everything's, actually what it is, just to try it out, just to see if I want to actually go that route with my Craftworld Eldar. So this was a long time coming. We announced this way back and I told you guys about it, that I would be doing something like this during the summer. However, we have moved it forward a little bit just because of 10th edition, and we want to be able to get these games in before 10th releases and possibly just changes everything up to such a drastic degree that the models we have may or may not be usable. And I don't think that's going to happen. I think with the announcement that they made, that you can pretty much take anything. That means that most units are going to be viable to some degree, I think. Well, at least I hope, right? And yes, to answer some of your guys' questions, I am going to be doing a review of the 10th edition reveal and what GW has told us so far about 10th edition and what I think applies specifically to the Craftworld Eldar. And I'm going to be covering this in a later video. I'm probably going to try to get it out before the end of the weekend very soon. I am also going to be coming out with a How to Fight Tau video. Now, this has taken me a little bit longer than usual just because Tau are such a massive army to go through all of their rules. And one of my subscribers recently actually had a game against Tau, I think Nick the Noodle, who, has kind of actually been one of my first subscribers, so shout out to Nick. And he told me that basically they had so many special rules he didn't even know what was going on in the game, which I totally understand. I had a good idea of what Tau did before I started playing my buddy who plays Tau in the group. Again, he hasn't busted out his Tau since 8th edition, so when he busted him out and we kind of dove into a couple games and we started to really learn all the interactions again, it was a dizzying amount of special rules. So I am going to get that video out. It just might be a little bit later than I hoped. And with the announcement of 10th edition, I do want to make sure that I also get that in for you guys so that you guys, kind of have my opinion on, the new 10th reveal and, my hopes and dreams for that. So to speak. As for this Escalation League, I will be playing with a uniquely painted army that I basically built from scratch. It is, and I will show pictures of it once I'm done with it fully. I'll give you guys kind of what it looks like and stuff like that. I don't think it's a spectacular paint job. I'm going to be honest with you. They're metallic Eldar, which is kind of unique, which I was wanting to do for a while just to kind of do it because it was different. My regular models that I've had for years and years and years are basically just, primed white, washed, or just base painted and, have a wash over them. They're very basic looking. They're kind of old looking. To be honest with you, I'm really not proud of a lot of the models that I used to paint from my Eldar. So that's kind of why I don't really show them on the channel that much, because a lot of them look, well, primed black, dry brushed with some details, and that's about it. They're pretty bare bones as far as that goes. So, I've never been, a golden demon aspirer or anything like that. So, when I started this army, I did want to make them a little bit better looking than my normal, troops and normal army, which I think I did. But, looking at them, I still don't think they're, anything out of this world. And I've seen some really good work from you guys. And I think in the future, I also want to do some sort of community showcase to show you guys, or show the Eldar community the work that we have done on our miniatures, because I think it's really cool. And I think a lot of you guys pour a lot of your hearts and souls into this stuff. And so do I, obviously, or else I wouldn't have this channel. So definitely looking forward to something like that in the near future. So basically, if you guys want to submit any of your, pictures of your work or, a unit that you're particularly proud of painting, go ahead and send it to me at my email, proxy.hammer1@gmail.com, and I will include it in a future video. And, that'll be cool. All right, let's move on to the actual video and stop talking about stuff that's unrelated. So before we begin, just a quick overview of what we're going to be looking at in this video. I'm going to be talking about what this Escalation League is and why should you care. So obviously, a lot of you guys are going to be looking at this and saying, oh, well, this really has nothing to do with me. This is your league and who cares, right? But I kind of have a way of, I want to include you guys in it in a way. And I'll kind of go into why in just a second. And I'll talk a little bit about how I plan to include the community in this in a way. We're also going to be talking about the rules and restrictions of the league, because it's not like a regular game where basically all your restrictions are just based on the rules. We're going to have some additional restrictions which make it harder to spam certain units and make it harder to kind of, do some different things. And lastly, we're going to be looking at what I'm taking for the Escalation League. I have two lists written up, my 500-point list and my 750-point list. Now, my 500-point list is the one that's officially due by the end of this week. So the weekend, basically Sunday. I've basically already decided what I'm going to take for 500 points. And the reason I didn't really include you guys in the formation of that or ask you guys about it is because, well, I didn't really have the models painted for it, to be quite honest with you. And, if I included you guys in it and you said, oh, why don't you include a second unit of Dire Vendors, or why didn't you include this, or, you should do this, which, may have been great advice. Maybe I wouldn't have got all the painting done. And, we basically came up with this fact that if you don't, for whatever reason, have those models painted, you can still participate. But they just count as destroyed from the beginning of the game. So basically, it puts a huge handicap on you, and you really have to get those done. So that's kind of what we're working with here. So what is this Escalation League, and why should you care? So this is how I kind of plan to include you guys in it. So I'm going to be posting the results on this channel this spring and talking about each match in depth. So we're going to have 3 matches for each point level, and we're going to go up to 1,000 points. Originally, it was 2,000, but again, because the new edition is coming out right around the corner, a lot of people in the group were very uncomfortable spending a lot of money on this. Because a lot of these models had to be new, which, it wasn't mandatory. I mean, we allowed people to use their old models and stuff, but, obviously there was a kind of a push to, kind of buy more stuff, and, you know how that kind of thing goes with leagues and stuff like that. Sometimes, when players get together and they want to do something new, they want to buy new models for it. So I certainly did that because I wasn't proud of my old collection, really, as far as how it's painted. So I wanted to go ahead and do something new, and a couple of other players had the same feeling about it. Okay. The other thing is that when we're going over this Escalation League, it can actually serve as a very good model for your local gaming group to play with and have some truly awesome and fun restrictions to put your Warhammer game to the test. So again, there was more restrictions to this in the beginning because we were originally going to do it in a Highlander format, but an extreme version of it, where basically every single data sheet, including troops, was limited to one selection. So you really had to use your brain a little bit to kind of come up with a list. Now, a lot of players complained about this in the beginning, and it was super funny because I remember we had, somebody who wanted to do Thousand Suns for this Escalation League, and basically he found out he was going to have to take things like Tansgores and stuff like that. And he was going to have to take units like Tansgores and Bray Shamans and stuff like that, So really just shitty units that no one uses. And he was going to have to do that. I was going to have to take things like Storm Guardians or Guardian Defenders, which, I don't think they're the worst units, to be honest with you, but Storm Guardians are pretty bad, right? At least I think they are. Maybe some people can make them work, but I just look at that unit and I'm like, man, that unit has absolutely no role in our army. And it's funny because even if you invest in them and give them a bunch of buffs, give them a bunch of their special weapons and stuff like that, you give them enhance, you give them empower and stuff, or you jinx the enemy unit, you give them guide and all that, you just go all out on them. They still do worse damage point for point than Howling Banshees, which is absolutely crazy. And I'm talking Howling Banshees that are unbuffed, right, with just their Exarch power. So anyway, I was going to have to take units like that possibly. And that was going to make my army obviously worse, but the goal was just to have fun with this league. Now, because of Arcs of Omen, we had it kind of put some players over the edge in our group, and they were like, oh, well, now we can't do it, right? We just can't do it. There's a requirement that you have to take 3 of something, right? Even in 500-point games, you have to take either 3 elites, 3 fast attack, 3 troops, or 3 heavy support. So a lot of armies just couldn't do it. They could not fit, units in there without breaking that rule of 1. So we decided to make it a rule of 2 instead, and I'll talk about that when I go over the restrictions and rules for the league. But, one of the players who was complaining about it the most was the Thousand Suns player that we have in the group, who really wanted to play Thousand Suns in this, but really just the rules just don't really work well for Thousand Suns because, that and Death Guard, by the way, they both are a little bit tough to deal with when it comes to small games that require, 3 troops or 3 elites that also have to be unique, right? And now, as far as this video's or this league's interest for you guys, obviously, if that doesn't appeal to you in a way, watching the, progression of the Escalation League and the battle reports that come out of it and stuff like that, no worries, but at least the battle reports should be fun. So definitely stick around for those. There are going to be some tactical discussions about those in the coming months, before the release of 10th edition. Okay, so let's talk about the rules and restrictions. So it is going to use the Arcs of Omen detachment. We played around with the idea of not doing it and just making up our own, but we decided that was kind of dumb because, basically those are the rules that are built for it. So we just figured, let's just go with that and let's just kind of make some different restrictions that make sense, right? So now we can take no more than 2 of each unit and 3 for troops. So now our Thousand Suns and Death Guard players that are participating in the league can actually field something relatively decent in 500 points without having to, worry too much about it. They can just field 3 units of Rubric or Marines or, 3 units of Death Guard or, what are they called? Plague Marines? Yeah. So it's not a big deal for them anymore in small point games. But the cool thing about these limitations is in bigger games, they're going to have to branch out a little bit, right? So after they do their 3 units of Rubric or Plague Marines, they're going to have to branch out and do something else. They can't just spam those constantly. So that's going to be interesting as well. There's also a limit on unique characters. So no more than 1 unique character per army. So if you have, for example, let's just take the Thousand Suns player. If you have Ahriman, you're also not going to be able to take Magnus, right? You have to choose one or the other. You can't do both. And I think that's a really cool change because it prevents, character spam and character bombing, which I think is a really cool thing. A lot of armies actually, kind of spam characters a lot. And unique characters at that. So I think that would be a good change to prevent some players from doing that. AKA Thousand Suns, right? Anyway, okay. Not that our Thousand Suns player really runs Magnus the Red. I'm just giving him a hard time if he watches this at all. And then, lastly, all models must be painted in base, of course. Now, there are some additional rules and restrictions. So once you take a unit in your army, you can't remove it in larger games, but you can increase or decrease its size and change upgrades and weapons. So in 500 points, if I choose to use a unit of Dire Avengers, I'm stuck with a unit of Dire Avengers for the rest of the league. So it was originally going to be to 2,000 points, but now it's to only 1,000. So it's not that big of a deal. I love Dire Avengers. I think they're a great unit. So it's not a big deal. But basically, once you put a unit in your army, you're stuck with it. So, like, for example, if I had a unit of Dire Avengers in my 500-point list, which I do, I could not take that out in future lists to fit something else in. So that's also another thing that's really cool about this league, is that players have to think a little bit about not only what their list is going to be now, but what their list is going to look like in the future, right? What is your 750-point list going to look like? And how can you add on units that are worth 250 points without taking away too much from your current list? And again, you can change upgrades, you can change weapons or unit sizes and stuff, but that unit has to stay in there. Lastly, well, almost lastly, so second to last is the fact that you can't change army special rules. So if you were Uthway in the beginning, you can't change to Bealtan later in the league. And I actually chose Swift Strikes and Masterful Shots for this, just because I've really been enjoying that combination, and I actually think it's a very versatile combination that basically benefits every single unit in the list. Okay, so lastly, Warlord traits and relics cannot be removed or changed once taken. So if I choose to take the Phoenix Gem on my Farseer, I cannot remove that for the rest of the league. So that's pretty big, because that kind of messes with your command points. So let's say that you go into a bigger, list and you want to use Webwave Strike or something like that. Well, if you spent one command point on the Phoenix Gem, you may not have enough for Webwave Strike. Now, of course, you would have enough for Webwave Strike in this case. But, if you took, the Phoenix Gem and you took a Warlord trait like Seer of the Shifting Vector, and you only start out with a couple command points, you're not going to have enough, basically, for that Webwave Strike. So there was, some stuff going on there that players have to plan around as well. So it ended up not being a big deal for my army, because I just didn't take any Warlord traits or relics in the very beginning, because I want honestly points for things like Phantasm and stuff. So my kind of play style has always been to keep my options open when it comes to deployment and stuff like that. And I always leave at least 2 command points, maybe even 3 at the start of the battle for Phantasm, because I think it's awesome. And honestly, it's useful in every single list I've ever played. I've always liked using Phantasm, even back in the day. By the way, some of you guys might remember this, but back in the day, in like 4th edition and 3rd edition stuff, the only model that could do that in basically the entire game was Eldrad Uthran. I'm serious. Only Eldrad could do this. And basically, he could redeploy D3+1 units in your army. And that was like fucking dope at the time. I remember thinking to myself, oh my God, this is like the best ability in the world. And I would tell players about it. I'd say, hey, just remember I can redeploy. And they're like, okay, whatever. And they just set up their army, and then I just redeploy on them, right? I would set up first, purposely set some stuff out of place, and they would just get so greedy with it. And I remember just their faces would just light up when I would leave a fire prism out in the open. Or I would leave, a unit of Harlequins just in the middle of the table, just, waiting to be shot at. And their eyes just lit up, and they were just like, oh, I'm going to kill that unit. What a stupid mistake. And I just remember saying, oh, Eldrad, redeploy, and just redeploying it to the other side of the board, and just looking at their faces going, oh my God, now my stuff's out in the open and going to get killed. Right? My favorite story of doing this to somebody, and I know we're getting a little bit off topic here, but at some point I did want to just make a video of these funny stories for you guys of stuff that's happened to me over the years in 40K that I find amusing. So basically what happened was we're at this tournament, and it was about a 20-player tournament, so it wasn't that big. It was in 5th edition, and he was running Imperial Guard, and this guy was known for basically just running whatever was the best at the time. He was basically your classic meta chaser. I think he ran Blood Angels as well when they were good. And he basically just switched from army to army when the codexes came out. And he had the, obviously the revenue to just keep buying this stuff and, Yeah, very competitive player, played in a lot of tournaments and stuff like that. And in Warhammer Fantasy, I think he also just had the most, kind of OP kind of armies that would basically just come out. So that was the kind of player he was, and he was very competitive and stuff like that. So I got matched against him in this tournament in the third round. The first 2 games I won, and it was the winner's bracket, and I was against him. And he had won his previous 2 games. He smashed his opponents, and, people were like, kind of watching our game. And I remember thinking, okay, my army cannot beat his in a straight-up fight, for one, because I know that I play Eldar. At the time, the rules for line of sight were basically true line of sight, and there was only 1 or 2 pieces of line of sight blocking terrain on the table, one of which was directly in the middle of the board. And I remember I took Eldrad, and I told him this in the very beginning. Oh, I have Eldrad. And he's like, oh, okay, so you have that redeployment ability. Because he was a competitive player and he knew. So I was like, okay, so I was running something that was a little bit meta. I was running a lot of Wave Serpents, but I was also running some off-meta stuff. I was running at the time Howling Banshees, which, if anybody remembers 5th edition, Howling Banshees were basically considered useless in a lot of lists. So I was running Howling Banshees. I was running a unit of Seer Council in a Wave Serpent as well. So, it wasn't the most competitive thing out there, as far as Eldar is concerned, the pinnacle of Eldar competitiveness back then. But, it was what I enjoyed playing, and I just wanted to have some fun, right? So I go first. I deploy first, I should say. And I deploy my army. And I remember I had 2 Night Spinner units, which I put on one side of the table. And there was 1 lane of line of sight that they could see from, right? So if he deployed opposite to the Night Spinners with anything significant as far as its firepower or value went, they were basically going to be not able to shoot anything else in the entire army, right? So I put my Night Spinners over there, and he put 3 Leman Russ battle tanks on that side of the board. And he also put 3 Chimeras on that side of the board right in front of the Leman Russ battle tanks. And he put a huge blob of infantry in this big piece of cover that was just to the right of him. And then he deployed the rest of his forces kind of sparse on the other side of the table. And I just remember thinking, I guess he forgot about Eldrad. And when I told him about the redeployment, that I was going to redeploy, his face just dropped immediately. And he said, oh God, of course you are. I pulled my Night Spinners to the other side of the board, and I pulled my Fire Dragons that were in the Wave Serpents as well. I actually rolled good on the redeployment. I got 4 units that I could redeploy. I pulled them over to the other side of the table, where he had another unit of Leman Russ battle tanks that were trying to get some angles downfield at my other units. So when I went first, because, back then, if you deployed first, you just went first. And whoever deployed second tried to steal the initiative, but it was only on a 6. So he failed that. I had 2 units of Fire Dragons, basically turn 1, move forward, hop out of their Wave Serpent, which back then, by the way, you could move 12 and hop out of your Wave Serpent and basically still shoot and stuff like that. Things were a lot different back then in 5th edition, but basically, my 2 units of Fire Dragons blew up his Leman Russ battle tanks pretty fiercely and basically took out whatever was left on that side of the board. And from then on, he basically couldn't win the game. It was impossible. He didn't have line of sight on any of my important units. The units he did have line of sight on were destroyed, of course, but they didn't matter because they were just Dire Vengers, and back then Dire Vengers were kind of like cheap fodder. The middle of the board couldn't be taken because I also slammed 2 Wave Serpents right in front of his block of tanks on the left-hand side, empty Wave Serpents, of course, and that basically took him turns and turns and turns to be able to kill, which was absolutely hilarious, to be honest. However, because of how the objectives worked back then, he controlled his objective on his side of the board at the end of the game, so he got 1 point for that. I controlled my objective on my side of the board, so I got 1 point for that. And I think I had First Blood, and he had something. I can't remember exactly. I think he had Slay the Warlord, actually. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, I had Linebreaker because I was in his deployment zone. So it was 3-2. So I won that game, and I remember he was so salty about Eldrad that he did nothing but for 30 minutes complain about how if I didn't have Eldrad, I would have lost. And Eldrad won me the game and all this stuff, and he was super upset about it. So, it was a funny time. It was a funny time. I have a lot more stories like that too, but I think I'll leave that for another day because it would probably take another 30 minutes to explain. And, if you guys have had any experiences like that as well, do you want to go ahead and share and type into the comments? Please do so. I would love to hear your stories. I think one of the best things about Warhammer, playing with actual people, not just people online on some video game, is being able to, kind of tell these stories about your experiences. So definitely really funny and really cool thing about the hobby. Okay, so let's go ahead and dive into what I'm taking and look at the rough drafts of my lists so far for Arcs of Omen. So we're going to be looking at a 500-point list and what I'm going to add on for 750 points. So the army traits are going to be Swift Strike, so units count as stationary in the movement phase. When they shoot, they do have to be able to shoot, though, in the first place to be able to get that stationary effect. So they do need to have some sort of assault weapon or pistol to be able to fire to get that effect in the first place. And we're also going to have Masterful Shots, so units ignore light cover army-wide. So my 500-point list, I have a Farseer Skyrunner with Guide and Doom. Pretty simple. I can change the powers a little bit if I want to in future games, so I'm not too worried about what they are now. I might change Doom for Will of Azurian. I'm not positive on that yet. I have 5 Fire Dragons. The Exarch has a Fire Pike. I have 5 Dire Avengers. The Exarch has dual shuriken catapults. For fast attack, I have 3 Shroud Runners, 1 Viper with a scatter laser, and another Viper with a scatter laser, which is kind of the only way I was able to run it. So I will be having a max of 6 fast attack choices available to me for this Escalation League, which is perfect for a Swift Strikes list. And again, the idea behind this list is just to have a lot of single entities that can score on objectives, things like behind enemy lines, do things like scout the enemy. I know I don't have Rangers, but in small point games, Vipers are actually extremely good at scoring scout the enemy because they can get into the enemy deployment zone very easily. And because, if there's a decent amount of obscuring terrain on the table, which there probably will be, they can hide and use scout the enemy and not be shot at. The only thing I'm a little bit worried about is the third secondary objective because I don't have the tools in this particular list to do Warp Ritual. It's just too much investment. I'd have to invest at least 130 points in Warlocks, and I just don't have the points for it. So I think probably what I'll do is, I'll go for another kind of objective. I don't know what it is yet, but if any of you guys have any, suggestions, let me know. I think it's really just going to depend on my opponent. But for the most part, besides scout the enemy, besides, behind enemy lines, I'm actually thinking about a kind of, more killy objective, kind of something like grind them down. I was really actually considering grind them down because I don't really have a lot of units. But I'm just going to have to wait and see what my opponent has in store for me. And when I'm bumping it up to 750, this isn't set in stone. This is something I can change, but I'm pretty sure this is a good way to go about it. So I'm going to include a Warlock Skyrunner with Jinx and Protect, a Warlock with Quicken and Restrain, so I can pick up that Warp Ritual secondary. I'm also going to have a Falcon with a Scatter Laser. And the upgrade changes are going to be, I'm going to get rid of the Fire Pike on the Fire Dragons, because if they're in a Falcon, they don't really need the Fire Pike as much. And the Singing Spear on the Farseer, I'm going to go ahead and add. Just because I do have 5 extra points, and if you are running a Swift Strikes list, a Farseer can actually advance, throw his Singing Spear, and also shoot the Twin Shuriken Catapult. So I felt that was a good 5-point upgrade. I do like the Singing Spears on the Farseers and the Warlocks, if I can afford it. So, I think overall this is pretty balanced. I have tools to deal with anti-tank, both light tanks and also heavier tanks with the Fire Dragons. And again, I think there are going to be some players try-harding a little bit in this because we have come up with a prize for the Escalation League winner, which will be based on the total number of points scored in our games. So, I've talked to people in my group about this before, and I've talked to some other people, to be honest with you, about how tournaments are scored based on who scores the total amount of points. And to be honest with you, I don't really like it that much because in its current state, you could lose all 3 of your games in a tournament, and this usually doesn't happen, but technically you could lose all 3 of your games and still get a very good placing because you scored very high on your objective points. So, that's fair and all, but, I do feel like wins matter for something. But anyway, that's just my Eldar mentality, I guess, kicking in. But yeah, I think this is a very balanced list in general. It has tools to deal with a lot of different enemy types, and it also has a lot of objective tools, so it's good at scoring objectives. Vipers and Shroud Runners are extremely effective at it. I have the Warlock combo in here, and of course, not for nothing, but a Falcon in low points with Cloud Strike can even be used by itself to get behind enemy lines during turn 1, if I wanted to, right? And if my enemy doesn't screen it out. Which, again, by the way, in 500 point, 750 point games, having something that can deep strike turn 1 is a very good, thing to have in your back pocket. So I did want to make sure that I had the Falcon in here and not just a Wave Serpent. Because, of course, a Wave Serpent, you think a Wave Serpent would be a good choice here because you could, fit your Fire Dragons and your Dire Avengers in it. And also a Warlock if you wanted to, for whatever reason. But again, the reason I chose to go with the Falcon over that is because it does give me a little bit more objective control and it does give me a better punch over the Wave Serpent. But, my 750 point list is not set in stone yet. We're going to start our 750 point games at the end of April. Well, yeah, at the end of April, basically. So, I do have some time to work on that. So if you guys have any suggestions for my 750 point, to upgrade from my 500 point list, which I do have to take. That's pretty much what I'm going to run because that's just what I have painted so far. But, let me know your ideas. I really want to hear your guys' feedback on that. And, also let me know your ideas for any possible upgrades into 1,000 points. I really haven't looked at that yet, but yeah, definitely give me your guys' opinions on what you think I should do. Okay, so in conclusion, I think no matter what, I think this league should be really fun, right? The league was originally, again, going to be much more casual, but since Arcs of Omen came out and now there's a prize involved, I think people are going to be a lot more try-hard for it. I have a really big feeling, actually, that a lot of players in the league are going to have some really mean builds that are going to be close to the meta, right? I mean, of course, it can't be fully meta because there is a limit on things you can take, but, I've heard some of, the players talk about what they're going to bring, and I'm like, oh, okay, that's basically just as meta as you can get without breaking the restrictions. So go figure on that one. I think, obviously when you involve a prize, people really get kind of competitive over it. But, whatever. It is what it is. I was going to include Guardians in my list at some point, even if I don't need to take them. I was just going to include them just to have fun with them because I think they're a fun unit. So I don't know. We'll see how it goes. But my first game is next weekend at the end of March. And again, before then, I need to paint another Viper and the rest of my Dire Avengers. I showed you guys a short of my Dire Avengers just base coated. I've gotten a little more done on them, but I need to finish those pretty much by the end of the week. And also get that Viper done as well because, I have 2 Vipers in the list and I only have 1 painted so far. So I'll definitely post the results for you guys and do a little battle report of the first game and, kind of include you guys in that. I don't know who my first game is against yet. I'll find out this weekend, and then I'll kind of be able to have more of an idea of what I'm going up against. But I'm definitely going to include you guys and tell you about the results and things like that. And I think whatever happens, it's going to be fun. I'm going to take a more casual approach to it. Obviously, I am going to try to win it because, I love Eldar and I love to represent them and stuff like that and make them, do well on the table and stuff. But I am going to take it more casual. I think at some point I am going to take probably 10 Guardians in a 1,000 point list just because, I haven't painted up and I like the models. Even the old ones, I like the old ones a lot. And that's actually what I have painted up. I don't actually own new Guardians because, well, let's just put it this way. I have 2 units of Guardians and I'll never need either of them. So what is the point of buying another box? Unless I'm doing a conversion or something like that. Unless I'm making them Dire Avengers, I don't see the point. And that may change, with the coming edition. Who knows? We'll just have to wait and see. But anyway, probably not going to need a 3rd box in any case. All right, everybody, that's going to be it for today. Sorry for the long drawn-out video that wasn't really about strategy or tactics or anything like that, but I wanted to share that with you guys because it's something fun I'm going to be doing, and I wanted you guys to be a part of it in a way. We have a video coming up on Tau. We also have a video, again, coming up on the new 10th edition reveals and what I think about it, predictions and stuff like that. So definitely stay tuned for that. And for those of you who have supported me on Patreon and PayPal, thank you so much once again. I'll leave the links for those in the description for anybody who wants to support the channel further. It would be really appreciated. And of course, as always, thank you so much for just watching the video. All right, everybody, that's going to be it for today. Peace out. See you guys later. And have some great games this weekend. Have a good one, everybody. See you later.